Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to another fantastic episode of Dr. Question and Answers. So happy to be here and bringing this to you. I am Neil Hutchins-Resto, your treat fairy.
Hi,
Hello,
Neil. Good
Dr. Q.
morning.
Good morning, Dr. Q. So, Dr. Q, we actually have a really important topic that we need to go over today, and it's one of our actual really frequent questions in positive pet advice. And for those of you that don't know, Dr. Q and I are admins on a group called Positive Pet Advice on Facebook, where we answer all of your potential questions, concerns, or just give you our general advice. So here we're bringing you guys some things on vaccines. Now, Dr. Q, vaccines, it can be such a heavy topic. And, I want to be able to bring some real information on this topic to our viewers. So would you be able to start us off with just a brief, in your eyes, as a veterinarian, what is a vaccine?
So a vaccine is something that helps protect us from disease. And so what it is actually a small amount, a very small microscopic amount of that disease that has been changed so that it doesn't make you sick, but then we take it into the body through the form of a shot. And what that does is sort of helps our immune system build up little soldiers, so to speak, against that. They go, oh, wait, if we ever see this guy, we better have some soldiers in line that are trained on how to combat him. And so that's how it works. And so that's how we then have these little sort of soldiers in the ready waiting to help protect us in case we're actually ever confronted with the actual non-changed disease.
Yeah. That's like a great explanation for it. Thank you so much for that. Now, Dr. Q, how important are vaccines in the actual health of our pets, whether it be our cats or our dogs or our horses? What are some of those health benefits to having vaccines?
I'm so glad you asked that, because as a holistic veterinarian, most of my clients are definitely those sort of people that are kind of scared of vaccines, have had bad experiences, or are concerned about over-vaccinating. But I would also caution you, everybody, not to forget the other side of the coin, which is that it wasn't that long ago, only maybe like 30 years or so ago, that we had little puppies dying left and right all over the place of distemper and parvo disease, and there was really not that much that we could do for them. Same for humans. Back in the 1800s, people died of flu like by the hundreds, and so today we go, flu vaccine, whatever, but it was a life-saving thing 100 years ago. So they have their place. They definitely have their place. We just have to balance out the use of them with any potential risks, because anytime you're putting anything in the body, no matter what it is, even if it's a vitamin, it's going to have some kind of an effect on the body, and there's always the potential for it to not be a good effect for that particular person. So we always have to balance those risks with the reward and just be educated before we ingest anything or put anything into the bodies of our animals.
Right. So, based on, your experience and usage, what would you say are the vaccines that should be used? Which ones would you recommend? And would you be able to explain maybe a schedule as well on vaccines?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the easiest way to understand it would be to just really check out on the internet. You're going to find like the AVMA's website, something they have distilled down and called the core vaccines. And these are sort of the vaccines that we think are really important to protect people and animals from those diseases that have the highest risks. And so core vaccines in general for dogs are going to be your rabies vaccine and your distemper parvo vaccines. And then for cats, it's going to be also the rabies vaccine and then also the feline distemper vaccine. So there's a whole lot of other vaccines out there besides those, from the feline leukemia vaccine to lepto to bordetella for dogs. And all of those then need to become an individual conversation with your veterinarian about your animal and their particular risk for any of those diseases.
Now, Doc, I kind of want to go a little bit off course here. Still related to topic, but my question is, would you be willing to speak a little bit into Lyme's vaccines? I know it's not something that you're extremely familiar with. It's not really, you know, it's not really big in your area. However, would you be able to talk to us a little bit on vaccinating for Lyme's disease and how Lyme's disease could potentially affect the body?
Yeah, so I used to be involved in veterinary medicine in Ohio, and that's a little closer to you. And in there, Lyme's disease was much more of a concern. We had dogs getting positive for it. We had people that were positive for it. And so, and we vaccinated for it relatively regularly, and we really didn't see too many negative side effects. So again, that's where that whole conversation with your veterinarian becomes really important, is to say, so say, for example, I moved to a whole different part of the country and I had no idea what to expect there. What I would do is I would call maybe 3 to 5 veterinary hospitals in the area, and I would ask them, how many cases of lepto have you actually treated in the last 10 years? And of those, how many of those animals died? Because to me, the measure of whether or not a vaccine is something that I want to use is how likely is death going to occur.
Exactly.
Not just a little ill, not feeling good for a few days, or inconvenienced with a cough or something like that. But actually, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yes, if death is a possible potential, a realistic potential, then I would very seriously consider that vaccine.
What are some risks associated with the core vaccines? You know, I know Lyme's is one of those ones that's kind of out there, as well as kennel cough and things like that. But of the core vaccines, what are some of the side effects I should be looking for, or what are some of the risks that are involved in those vaccinations?
Yeah, again, thanks. So, really great thing to talk about. So, there's one thing that a veterinarian actually can do when they're choosing which vaccines to use in their practice, and that is to very carefully pick ones that are more pure and have less added chemicals in them. The less, the better, right? I think most of us feel like keeping it simple is usually the way to go. And there's some new vaccines, distemper specifically, that have come out that I really like, because there's half as much volume to the vaccine, because they've taken out a whole lot of the mercury and other impurities in the vaccine that was used in the past as carriers to help deliver it into the immune system. And that's one of the big concerns that people that have ever researched vaccine reactions worry about, is those things. They're called adjuvants. And so veterinarians can use those. So therefore, that'd be a good conversation. Ask your vet, hey, do you use the best vaccines that have the least adjuvants that are available today? I think that's perfectly reasonable conversation to have, is to just find that out. And then otherwise, just common sense. Smaller dogs, I tend to not give a whole bunch of vaccines on the same day if I don't have to. Well, any size dog, actually. So if we can space them out, that's better. That's how I like to do it. Yes, it might involve a few more visits, but in the long run, I think it's easier on the immune system if it's not bombarded all at once with this huge task of creating all these different kind of soldiers, so to speak.
So, boosters. Let's talk boosters, Dr. Q. What vaccines, in your professional opinion, deserve boosters, and what would you classify as excessive boostering?
Yeah, so the main time that I see excessive boostering is with breeders that have puppies. And so a lot of times they're vaccinating them like at 3 weeks and at 5 weeks and at 7 weeks. And some of these puppies are getting like 5 vaccines before they're 12 weeks old. And so we know from immunology that those puppies aren't even really capable of producing any kind of an immune response at some of those younger ages. And so really all we're doing is sort of insulting their immune system without hope of having any kind of a reasonable outcome. So that's one thing that I try to educate people to avoid, if at all possible, is kind of the over-vaccinating puppies. But of course, puppies are the most at risk, so they do need some vaccines. So in an ideal world for me, I'd like to see my puppies getting a vaccine at 8, 12, and 16 weeks for the distemper parvo, and then a rabies also at the 16-week mark or somewhere in there. That's how I like to do my puppies. Boosters after that, again, it's going to depend on the vaccine. Most of the protocols today show that these vaccines last 3 years. And so that's what most veterinarians right now are recommending, is a 3-year booster. Except for the first adult vaccines after a puppy has had their puppy set, then they need one booster a year later from that 16-week mark. And then after that, we can go to every 3 years, if that makes sense. And that's just
Absolutely.
And that's just for dogs. So for kitty cats, a little bit different. And this is all going to depend on what vaccines they already had or didn't have. Say, for example, for kittens, I like them to get a similar schedule, or depending on if they don't have a whole lot of risk, I might be okay with just doing 2 kitten distemper boosters as babies until we get them up to that 16-week mark, and then boosting a year later, and then also going on to the every 3 years, again, depending on their risk. They're outdoors all the time. If they're, around a whole lot of stray cats or feral cats in the area, they're barn cats, exposed to a lot of bats or skunks where they might get rabies, then you may want to discuss that with your veterinarian and adjust accordingly.
Awesome. So, in your professional opinion, again, Dr. Q, what would you say should be a reasonable schedule for vaccinations on an adult dog?
Well, a reasonable schedule for an adult dog with a reasonable amount of risk would be a once every 3 years. But again, it's going to depend on the vaccine that was used and what the manufacturer recommendation is on it. So believe it or not, those are not just random things that somebody decided to come up with. There's actually a lot of studies done that prove and show how long those animals are protected by that vaccine. And which brings me to another thing, which we do a lot of here, that you may or may not have ever heard of, and that's called titer testing. Do any of your clients over there do titer testing?
It's actually surprising. I'm one of the few that actually prefers to do titer testing. I usually do it more in my senior dogs as well as the dogs, in my fleet and my clients. We tend to do it more in the seniors than we do in some of our younger dogs. However, a lot of our working dogs will get titers done just because we'd rather not inject them with a vaccine that they're still showing signs of immunity to the whatever the virus is. In this case, could be lepto or Lyme's or what are some of the distemper. Have you ever seen cases of corona, Doc? Just because I'm, on a rampage.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. I have actually not that I am aware of. I mean, I might have seen a respiratory case that might have been corona, and we just didn't diagnose it. But on its own, it's not something that I found in my experience to be one of the more serious concerns.
Is that generally in your practices 5-in-1? I know it's general practice at a majority of the larger clinics. However, a lot of them put it in like a 5-in-1 or a 7-in-1. Do you find that those vaccines are okay? Because some of those are readily available at retail stores, and I know some people are willing to vaccinate their own animals. Are there any precautions that you would warn them about doing things like that?
Well, I think you always have to be careful about vaccines. I mean, they need to be stored properly. We need to watch the expiration dates. We also need to know what we're vaccinating with and why. Is there a real serious corona risk in that area and we're not putting it in the vaccine, but maybe we should be buying the vaccine that has corona? Those are the things that we need to be figuring out and being really confident about before we just start vaccinating animals on our own. It's often a long conversation with people and their risks. And sometimes we choose sort of a middle of the road compromise, which is maybe not exactly what the ABMA standards would like, and maybe, but it's somewhere in the middle of the road depending on what the individual client feels comfortable with.
Right. So, Dr. Q, I have a really, really silly question, and that would you be able to talk a little bit on some of the adverse reactions in vaccines? Do you want to get into some of the nitty gritty and some of the dark stories?
Yeah. So what I guess the most important thing I would say is just really don't forget to communicate with your veterinarian anything unusual that your animal does after a vaccine. Because what I've seen in my practice a lot of times is, okay, we're supposed to get these vaccines. We don't really ask the vet what it is or worry about it. We just trust that they know what they're doing. They give the vaccine, we go home. My dog's maybe a little lethargic. Maybe my dog throws up a little bit. Maybe my cat hides or has a loose stool or something like that in the litter box after the vaccine. And we just kind of go, oh, well, it wasn't a big deal. And then we go on with our lives and we don't worry about it. And we forget to tell our veterinarian and we forget to add that into the medical record. And then the next year, we lose records, what have you, go ahead and revaccinate maybe a little bit sooner than we would have if we'd had the records. And then all of a sudden we're dealing with a full-blown vaccine reaction because that little minor reaction that the animal showed us a year ago wasn't documented anywhere. We forgot about it.
Right.
So I think that is something that I would just really like to impress upon anybody is that really intimately communicate with your veterinarian about anything that your dog or cat does after they get vaccinated that night or the next day. Worst case scenarios, what I've seen is, of course, the dogs that come in, and the most common vaccine reaction is a swollen face. And so a couple hours after the vaccine, you have, little men, they can't see, and their eyes are all swollen.
Everything comes in looking like a Shar-Pei.
They do. They all come in looking like Shar-Peis. And, and those pets, they need to be treated in an emergency hospital if the regular clinics are closed because we want to get a handle on that and get that swelling down. And then, of course, you're not going to forget that. And so then that'll be always a conversation that comes up anytime future vaccines are contemplated for that particular animal.
Are there any vaccines that have general symptoms? Just things that, you could probably expect that from your dog or your cat or your horse within the next 24 hours, that are just general.
So generally they're going to be a little bit tired. Okay, so they're going to be a little bit tired. And so, how much of that is from the vaccine and how much of that is from the stress of going into the clinic or having the vet come to the house or whatever your situation may be, it's hard to say. But usually that's going to be pretty normal and doesn't alarm me at all. Swellings at the injection site, firmnesses, we need to let our vet know about that, and we need to keep an eye on that. Probably one of the worst things I've ever seen, unfortunately, in my practice was a cat that actually developed malignant cancer after a fetal leukemia vaccine. So, but again, it can happen to any animal anytime. It's just a matter of how that animal reacts to it. Some are just going to be a little bit more prone to having serious issues like that. Treasure is crawling away.
Yeah, I was just going to see what was going on in your hair. That is so adorable. I love when Treasure joins us.
Where were you going?
And you were afraid the rat was gonna get stuck in your hair. So
at least I'm very grateful Bob tolerates all these animals really well.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Q, we've recently gotten a few questions, and I figured we could throw this in here as just a tie-up. We recently have gotten a few questions on catnip. And, using catnip around the house, or using it when you go to the veterinarian, or using it to help crate training. Do you think there's anything wrong with using catnip? Is there any addictions anyone needs to worry about? I mean, we all know they could probably get addicted to the dopamine high. So utterly it is reinforcing a behavior. But can you talk to us a little bit on your opinion about catnip?
I think catnip is great. What do you think, Bob?
Well, I was just curious if you and Bob got into some. You guys are cracking up over there.
Yeah, shh, don't tell anyone. No. Just kidding. I think that there's nothing to be concerned about with catnip as far as any reason not to use it. I think that it's great if your cat loves it, you know, and some cats love it more than others. As far as using it in training for your dog, I don't see any reason why not. I mean, if it's something that is helpful for you with scent training, that's great. If your dog actually enjoys it for some reason, I think, hey, you know, life is hard enough. So if we have something that's simple and safe and that any of us enjoy, then why not indulge in that a little bit? So I personally don't think that there's anything to be terribly concerned about with the use of catnip for dogs or cats in training or otherwise.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Q. And, you know, that seems like a perfect place for us to go ahead and wrap it up today. Thank you, Dr. Q, so much for joining us, and thank you everyone out there for listening. This is Dr. Question and Answers. I am Neil Hutchins, your treat fairy. Go ahead and subscribe to Dr. Q's channel. You can subscribe to mine as well, and don't forget to join the discussion about today's video on positive pet advice.
Yes, please, if any questions about any of that, if you want to know more about titer testing, if you want to know more about homeopathic remedies that could help counter effect some of the negative effects of vaccines, I'm happy to discuss all of that possibly in another episode. So thanks, Neil, for having me. Have a great day over there.
Thank you. Yes, I am buried in about a foot of snow, so yes. Have fun, Dr. Q.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
have a great day. Bye-bye.